with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, December 14th, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Rebecca Jane Morgan, author of Gender Heretics, Evangelicals, Feminists, and the Alliance Against Trans Liberation. And later in the show, Jonah Walters will be with us to talk about Jacobin's anti-obituary for Henry Kissinger. Meanwhile, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is in the Middle East, meeting with MBS and then Israeli officials. U.S. intelligence has found that Israel is indiscriminately bombing Gaza with imprecise bombs, which everyone could see with their own eyes for months. Politico reports that Kamala Harris is trying to get Biden to empathize more with Palestinians, citing her experience as a woman of color in the article, which I think is a very interesting piece of dirt or whatever to leak. You don't leak dirt. Info. You get what I'm saying. This comes as the United States is halting shipments of tens of thousands of police rifles to Israel over well-founded fears that they'll be handed to extremist West Bank settlers. Still sending a bunch of bombs, though. Workers from all over the world are taking action to halt weapons shipments to Israel. Polling finds an increase in support for Hamas in Gaza, and 90% want Western-backed President Mahmoud Abbas, Jesus, I can never say it, to resign, which is entirely predictable. The death toll in Gaza ticks closer to 19,000, reports of widespread starvation, over 50,000 injured, and rampant disease. Speaking of polling, things still look bleak for Biden. Trump now leads him in 7 swing states, and Gen Z voters in those states are overwhelmingly dissatisfied with the amount of student debt Biden has canceled. The House approved an impeachment inquiry into Biden along party lines, with every Republican voting yes on this fishing expedition. They're also threatening to hold Hunter in contempt because he's refusing to their request for him to testify behind closed doors. Understandably so. He wants to do it in public. The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a case regarding Jan 6 defendants, which could complicate and delay Trump's federal Jack Smith January 6 trial. The NLRB moves to force Starbucks to reopen 23 stores that they closed in order to union bust. And lastly, teachers in Florida sue the state over restrictions barring them from using their preferred pronouns. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It is an EmMajority Report Thursday. How is everybody doing? Hanging in there? I guess, is tonight the final night of Hanukkah? Happy Hanukkah to those who celebrate. It's a difficult holiday season for the same reason we've been talking about for 8-9 weeks at this point. The mass atrocities occurring in Gaza. And so, once again, we will open the show talking about it because, I don't know about you, but it's all I think about day and night. And, the Biden administration is continuing to insist that a two-state solution is the objective after this war. And I continue to despise the framing of this as a war. It is a crimes of genocide in Gaza. That's more appropriate, given the one-sided nature of this, obviously, and the history of the occupation and the apartheid, as we know very well. He keeps insisting that that is the objective after this mass campaign of killing is over. And we've gone through this on this program, that the two-state solution at this point is impossible. It's a pipe dream for liberals who want to continue the vision of an ethno-state in Israel, where it is a Jewish state in ethnicity, and the Palestinians are kept as second-class citizens if they live within the state, and the rest of them, we don't want to see
and strongly encouraged to leave.
Yes, right. And the problem with a two-state solution is that if you look at the maps of how much territory Israel has taken since the 1967 borders were drawn, and before that, since the foundation of the State of Israel, and in the past 2 decades or so, just the promulgation of settlers into what is supposed to be Palestinian territory, 700,000 far-right settlers seizing Palestinian homes in the West Bank. I believe that's the figure in the West Bank. It makes it an impossibility because so much of the territory is already gone. Just from a geographical
people
point.
don't understand, after 67, they occupied the West Bank, and immediately, when we start talking about human shields, immediately started putting civilian settlers there.
Yes.
Which is against the Geneva Conventions.
I mean, they've been in violation of international law for decades. And so it's just, unless you want to remove the 700,000 far-right, heavily armed settlers from the West Bank, then a two-state solution is an impossibility.
Yeah, be clear about what you
mean. And even then, we're talking about something that's a very difficult thing to achieve. It's
a UN occupation for a long time to keep peace. Settlers were kept out of Gaza, removed from Gaza, and they made a big, huge stink about it 20 years ago.
Right. It's a pipe dream. There needs to be one state. You can call it Israel-Palestine. They can have their own governments and have some joint congresses at certain points to discuss trade after we have a Truth and Reconciliation Committee to repair this immense damage that has been done, not just over the past few months, but in the years prior as well. But again, the Biden administration insists that's how they want to move forward. But the Israeli government has repeatedly said, no, not a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy like we advocate for, one state of just Israelis.
Greater Israel, it's all ours.
It's all ours, from the river to the sea, if you will. And don't take it from me. Take it from the Israeli ambassador to the the ambassador of Israel to the United Kingdom, speaking with Sky News' Mark Austin yesterday about a two-state solution.
Involvement, then forget about refugee camps. Why should they be refugees after 70 years of having independent life? They could have built their own life, but they didn't.
But re-education is a kind of, you think of China and you think of...
Absolutely not. This is what you did.
Camps
this is what you did in Nazi Germany. This is what the
Muslim
British
Uyghurs
people.
And so forth.
You're not learning from your own history. In this residence that you came to, there is a Churchill painting. There is one thing we learned from Churchill's experience fighting Chamberlain's policy, is the fact you cannot appease pure evil. So he knew you cannot negotiate with Hitler.
Can you pause it?
We know we can.
So, comparing the Palestinian population to Nazis is Holocaust revisionism. It's so far right and extreme that I don't even know how to really articulate it. But it's shared by Benjamin Netanyahu, who engages in Holocaust revisionism regularly. And a few years ago gave a speech that he had to, I think, apologize for, in which he said that Hitler did not actually want to exterminate the Jews and that he got the idea from the Palestinian Grand Mufti, which is a claim that has been widely debunked, but serves to say that the Nazis weren't as bad as the Palestinian people. And that's why we need to we should justify killing them. And this is clearly a conspiracy theory that is widely shared within the highest ranks of the Israeli government.
Insane people, in other words, yeah.
Cannot appease pure evil. So he knew you cannot negotiate with Hitler. We know we cannot negotiate with Hamas. It means we need to have a better future for the Palestinians. And in order to achieve that, you need to
pause it again. We can't negotiate with Hamas, but we want them to be funded, and we want them to rule Gaza. They are worse than Hitler, and yet the official policy of the Likud party and the Netanyahu government is to allow money to come through Qatar to go to Hamas in order to prop them up.
Just to back up to the thing she said at the very beginning, like they could have built a life that entire year. Why are they still refugees? That entire time, they had a right to return to the lands that they were kicked off of. That's the UN said you have right to the return, and that's always been the obstacle, because that means, oh no, there are actually too many Arabs here for our Jewish democracy to be a Jewish democracy. That's all this is.
Yep.
And so like they could have built a life. No, they actually had a legal right to resistance all this entire time, and also an obligation to, or a legal right to return to their homes. People still have the keys to their homes. Like this was an act of violence, and it's continued to lead to a spiral of violence that we all have to live through now.
Is there still a chance for a two-state solution?
I think it's about time for the world to realize the Oslo paradigm failed on the 7th of October, and we need to build a new one. And in order to build a new one...
Does that new one include the Palestinians living in a state of their own? Is that what it includes?
I think the biggest question is, what type of Palestinians are on the other side? This is what Israel realized
on the 7th
of October. The answer is absolutely no, and I'll tell you why.
Well, then
because
how can
at
there
the
be
moment,
peace?
no,
I'll answer
you. The reason there is no peace
Israel
is because the Palestinians...
without offering
Mark,
a state to Palestine, how can there be peace in Israel?
Israel knows today, and the world should know now, the reason the Oslo Accords failed is because the Palestinians never wanted to have a state next to Israel. They want to have a state from the river to the sea.
So the two-state solution is dead.
As I advocate...
Why are you obsessed with a formula that never worked, that created this radical people in the other side? Why are you obsessed with that? Think about it. Is that normal to carry on with a solution that never worked in the past? The Palestinians kept on denying, and now it will create another terror state. Israel is not interested in that.
Final question.
It's all projection. I mean, as you have said a few times, every accusation... Matt, every accusation is an admission here. So when she says the Oslo paradigm failed, I want to read this piece from 972 magazine from 2020 regarding Rabin, and it's called "The Myth of Rabin as the Peacemaker," in reference to the Oslo Accords. And this was after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez canceled a participation in an event that honored Rabin. And so 972 wanted to basically correct the record on this history here, and I'll read a bit of this piece. Rabin's decision to stake his career on negotiations with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, once an unthinkable prospect for most Israelis, was indeed daring. His outreach to Palestinian citizens of Israel to help him keep a government mandate and advance the accords was unprecedented. Many Palestinian citizens supported the peace process and even mourned Rabin's death. These nuances, however, do not compensate for the fundamental problem with the way Rabin is revered in Israel and abroad. His persona as a, quote, warrior turned peacemaker is almost exclusively centered on the final 4 years of his life, 5 decades of which were defined by hawkish and militaristic views. Shimon Peres, Rabin's rival turned ally, eventually received the same idolizing treatment. This cult of personality, dotingly crafted by the Zionist left in Israel and liberal Zionists in the United States, has particularly relied on a counterfactual argument that had he not been killed, Rabin might have helped to bring about a two-state solution. By the way, Rabin killed by an extremist Zionist because he even dared to speak to the Palestinians. Yeah. Ironically, the first person to dispute this narrative may have been Rabin himself. The words Palestinian state do not appear in the accords he signed, a fact that he and other Israeli officials were careful to ensure. A month before his assassination, Rabin told the Knesset that his vision was to give Palestinians an entity which is less than a state, was the quote. A precedent to the state minus advocated today by Netanyahu and outlined in Trump's deal of the century. Rabin also insisted that the Jordan Valley would remain Israel's, quote, security border, the very plan that drew international outcry this year, again, this is written in 2020, when Netanyahu pledged to formally annex the area. If Rabin's words were simply politicking with Israeli voters, then his government's actions spoke more clearly. From 1993 to 1995, according to Peace Now, Israel initiated the construction of over 6,400 housing units and settlements. In that time, according to B'Tselem, Israel also demolished at least 328 Palestinian homes and some structures, including in East Jerusalem, which rabbins sought to keep, quote, united under Israeli sovereignty. The result was that Israel's settler population rose by 20,000 and Palestinians were displaced in the thousands while Rabin sat at the negotiating table. All the while, Rabin's government used Oslo not as a blueprint to end the occupation, but to restructure it and minimize the cost to Israelis.
Yep.
The burden of controlling the occupied population was transferred to the newly created Palestinian Authority, which quelled nonviolent resistance and targeted armed militants on Israel's behalf. When you see those numbers about how people in Gaza and in the West Bank disapprove of the Palestinian Authority, you can understand why. Yeah. The Paris Protocol, which effectively held the Palestinian economy and their resources hostage to Israeli discretion, further cemented the economic exploitation of the Palestinians. These systems are still in place today, 2 decades after Oslo's expiration date. So let's just be clear here. This should dispel all myths about liberal Zionism, because the liberal Zionist two-state solution vision, especially as this article espouses, which is, ignorantly repeated here in the United States, is not even shared by the figurehead of liberal Zionism within Israel. It's always been expansionist. It's a settler colonial project, folks.
Yeah, prove them wrong.
And the trauma of the Holocaust, one of the worst crimes in human history, 6 million Jews exterminated by a fascist government, obviously, by the Nazis, has been exploited to run cover for a project that is fundamentally, obviously, one of the most atrocious things that we will ever live through. And what we're seeing now is just the final solution. I use that phrase to be provocative, but also to be accurate, of what the initial project always was meant to do.
Yeah, they're going for it. I mean, that's the problem with liberal Zionists, is they want to, again, still somehow talk to college kids instead of the actual leaders of Israel. I would recommend, and the problem I have about this and where we're at in this conversation is this is so far behind where the conversation needs to be. Avi Shlaim 10 years ago in The Guardian, it's now clear the Oslo peace accords were wrecked by Netanyahu's bad faith. And this is Avi Shlaim, who was a two-state guy in the 90s. I thought the peace accords 20 years ago could work, but Israel used them as cover for its colonial project in Palestine. And just one paragraph. Critical to the architecture of Oslo was the notion of gradualism. The text did not address any of the key issues in this dispute. Jerusalem, the right to the return of the 1948 refugees, the status of Jewish settlements built on occupied Palestinian land, or the borders of Palestinian entity. All these were put aside because of how, frankly, unwilling to negotiate Israel was before that. People thought let's just at least they're not treating them as animals or just terrorists, and are at least engaging in a political process. And they weren't serious about that at all. And actually, there's a huge problem. You want to talk about terrorist violence? Actually, that is in Israel, because that's who you see the
the point well taken. So can the Biden administration actually take Israel at its word? They're not interested in the two-state solution. When they say from the river to the sea is a call of genocide, it's projection. Because for them, they want just Israel from the river to the goddamn sea. And the surplus population of Gaza, of the West Bank, of the women and children and grandmothers and families and poets and beautiful human beings with lives. I mean, they're just in the way. So.
And what I was going to say is the assassination of Rabin. Look at what Yitzhak Rabin, who again, I think AOC was right to not go glorify Rabin, because I think it is all cynical. But look at the way his wife wouldn't shake Bibi Netanyahu's hand afterwards. And when we talk about a pathological violence in a society that is an obstacle to peace in a region, that is within Israeli society. And all this stuff about, and it's producing a similar sort of thing in the people that they are oppressing.
All right, folks, we're going to get to Rebecca Jane Morgan in a second, but first, a word from one of our sponsors. It's holiday season. Christmas is around the corner. You got to get some gifts for the people in your life. Better do it soon. Christmas is coming up. And I always find that the best gifts that I get people, and the ones that they love the most are the ones that have a personal touch and that are sentimental. And Aura frames is a great way to do so, to get that kind of gift. When you get someone a gift, you want to make them enjoy it immediately. No long setup or batteries required or assembly that makes everybody frustrated with one another. There's so many reasons to love Aura digital frames, but honestly, that might be my favorite. Just the fact that you have a code on the front, you can scan it while it's still in the box, load up these frames, and help people out, especially if they're a little older and they're not used to a digital frame. You can handle it all yourself, and it's super, super easy. You can start by downloading the Aura app for free, which takes no time to get the frame ready, and then you can preset the Wi-Fi on the frame and upload pictures beforehand while it's still in the box. So all your grandparents have to do is unbox it and plug it in. Super simple. Wirecutter called it the best digital picture frame. It is just such a wonderful gift, even for the most tech unsavvy people in your life. Give the perfect gift this holiday. Visit auraframes.com/majority today and get $30 off their best-selling frames. And these are beautiful frames too, not the crappy ones that you see sometimes that fall apart. These frames sell out quickly though, so get yours before they're gone. That's auraframes.com/majority, auraframes.com/majority. Use promo code majority to get $30 off their best-selling frame. Terms and conditions apply. That's again auraframes.com/majority. Use promo code majority to get $30 off their best-selling frame. Get your loved ones a gift that they will love with Aura. All right, folks, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be speaking to Rebecca Jane Morgan. We are back, and we are joined now by Rebecca Jane Morgan, author of Gender Heretics, Evangelicals, Feminists, and the Alliance Against Trans Liberation. Rebecca, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you because I've been on a war against TERFs for a little bit here on this program. Gotten a little heated on that front, so I have,
she's looking to ground herself.
Yes, I have immense anger towards them, obviously, for being transphobic. And so what might be helpful is for you and your expertise to trace the origin of them. And then also, they're kind of seemingly anachronistic based on their other stated beliefs, alliance with evangelicals. So let's just start with some simple definitions for people in the audience that may not be familiar. What is a TERF, and how did that moniker come to be?
Sure, yeah. So a TERF is an acronym. It stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. It was coined in 2008 by a feminist blogger who was just trying to find a term that was sort of easy to use to describe people who self-identify as feminists but don't include trans people. So that's where it comes from. There's a lot of debate about whether it's a good term or not. Personally, I don't think it is. I don't think there's any problem with using it, just it's not very accurate. primarily because, well, number one, a lot of these people, unfortunately, are not looking to just exclude trans people. They're looking to exterminate trans people. And number two, a lot of them are not radical feminists, and many of them aren't even feminists at all. So there we go.
Yeah, I mean, so why do they call themselves radical? And are they only radical in the fact that they hate trans people and they find that to be subversive? Because radical feminist theory would eschew, and I would imagine does eschew, these kinds of folks.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there used to be a myth that in the 1970s, radical feminism was sort of uniquely transphobic. But actually, there's a lot of evidence that a lot of radical feminists at the time were specifically trans-inclusive. And there were many trans people who were themselves radical feminists. I think there's debate about why radical feminism specifically seems to be so closely related with transphobia. Part of it is just the fact that trans visibility was rising at exactly the time that radical feminism was becoming more of a thing in the 70s. So I think there were problems in feminist theory, issues about how do we define what a woman even is, that have been around for centuries. It was just that in the 70s, radical feminists came along. They were very irreverent, very willing to be, in people's faces. And unfortunately, that was the same time when trans identities were becoming into the popular mainstream.
And the evangelical piece. I mean, you are a Christian yourself. What inspired you, I guess, to analyze this connection between evangelicals and TERFs?
Oh yeah. So I mean, the main thing that motivated me was the fact that in evangelical literature on this subject, almost all of it references TERF literature, or so-called gender critical literature, anti-trans literature, basically. So I was really interested in that because, I mean, a lot of the people who are writing this anti-trans doctrine are very different to a radical feminist on other issues, say like reproductive rights. So it's a strange sort of combination. So yeah, I really wanted to know where that came from, why that alliance specifically exists, and also what effect it's had on evangelical beliefs about this subject. So yeah.
Yeah, and you do such a wonderful job of like explaining the theology to someone like me, who's not religious at all, and I want to get into that for sure. But what surprised me is just how you look at and trace what the history of evangelical opposition to trans rights really goes back to and when it started. And I was surprised to see certain quotes supportive of trans people from Christian and evangelical ministers in the 60s and 70s. So what is that history, and when did it really kind of shift so rapidly?
Yeah. So if anyone, for anyone in the audience who's already sort of familiar with the history of the so-called moral majority in America, the Christian right, and particularly its relationship with reproductive rights, the history of evangelicalism and trans identity kind of has a similar trajectory. So in the early 70s and late 60s, a lot of evangelicals were very either ambivalent towards abortion or pro-choice, and it was only later that this impression that evangelical theology automatically leads to super conservative views came along. The same is true with trans issues. So in 1966, Johns Hopkins University performed the first what was then called a sex change in its facility, not the first ever, but the first at that facility. And a local journalist actually decided, for some reason, I don't know why, that they were going to go around all the local religious leaders and ask what they think about this surgery. I think there was 14 of them. So, Catholics, all sorts of Protestant ministers. 13 of them either had a mixed or positive perspective, including the local Southern Baptist minister, a guy called Roy Gresham, who said, simply, this is an area of medical science and not morally prohibitive. That's his quote. So, you know, and that continues into the early 70s. 1971, another Southern Baptist minister called David Eden says that he has worked with some trans people as a counselor, and says he recognizes in them a similar transformation to the transformation he sees in rebirth, you know, the Christian idea of being born again. And he says we need to use our medical knowledge, our skills to improve the lives of everyone, including trans people. And in Oklahoma, the Baptist General Hospital in Oklahoma City was one of the regional hubs for so-called sex change surgery at this time. It was only banned in 1977, when there was still dissent on the board of the local Baptist convention about whether this was good or not. So yeah, this idea that, oh, if you're an evangelical, you have to be transphobic is really quite recent. And just one last sort of quote to illustrate the point. Pat Robertson.
Right. We played this on our show. Yeah.
Yeah. In 2013, and it also happened in 2001. But in 2013, he says an audience member sent in a question about this issue, and his co-host is like visibly anti-trans, and he just says it's not for you to decide or judge. And it's only later that he retracts that statement because of pressure from other conservative leaders. So fundamentally, yeah, there's nothing in evangelical theology, and this is one of the big arguments I make in the book. There's nothing in evangelical theology that leads automatically to transphobia. It's something that's exerted on it from outside.
So when's the moment that you see it really have this kind of massive change?
Well, it depends on the country. I mean, here in the UK, it really changed around sort of the early 2000s when we had something called the Gender Recognition Act going through Parliament. So the Evangelical Alliance, which is our biggest evangelical group, hadn't said almost nothing about trans issues until this proposition came along. And then all of a sudden, they started to really pay attention to some super conservative American and British theologians. So they positioned themselves sort of against the Gender Recognition Act. But interestingly, part of why they did that isn't because they particularly cared about trans issues. It was because the Gender Recognition Act, in its early stages, potentially would have created some same-sex marriages. It was just a side effect of that. So that was the thing that really got them sort of worked up. So that's kind of when it starts to kick off in the UK. In the US, it depends. A lot of it doesn't even happen until the 2010s.
Right. With the bathroom bills.
With the bathroom bills, with the the sports stuff, all sorts of issues that just suddenly come along in the mid to late 2010s. Gamergate played a bit of a role in this. Transphobic memes online kind of kicked off during and after Gamergate. But the point is, it's really recent, and if it's recent, that prompts the question: well, is it really going to stay that long? Can we fix it? And it's difficult, but I think there are signs that we can.
Well, we've talked about this in this program, at least in terms of like the electoral salience of this. At Germentum has a great piece, but it's just the Republicans that are running on transphobia are have not done well electorally. It's just not something that resonates with people, and I guess that's a semblance of hope on this front.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They're losing battles electoral battles that they really should be winning right now. At this point in the electoral cycle. Same here in the UK. I mean, the Conservative Party, which has really been leaning into transphobia, is like 15, 20 points behind in the polls. I mean, it's not working.
Yeah.
And that points to, I think, something really important about this, is that the transphobic rhetoric is a tactic. It's not a strategy. It's about consolidating their base, getting their base fired up, But in the long term, it's really repulsive to a lot of people, including conservatives. In the US and the UK, polling data seems to suggest that a lot of young evangelicals are just either moving more in a progressive direction or really just don't care. So it's not a long-term strategy, and they will have to move on from it at some point. The downside of that, of course, is that when they move on from trans people, they'll go back to someone else. Maybe they'll go back to, my guess is they'll probably go back to primarily anti-Muslim, anti-Mexican rhetoric, the border. But yeah, it's not working, and they will have to move on.
Yeah, and I mean, you wrote a Medium piece about your book, and I encourage everybody to read the full thing. But this quote here really is a great summary of a lot of what you try to argue. In your book, you explain how a mutual distaste for dualist philosophies that place the will of the soul, i.e., what the soul or mind thinks about itself, above the material form of the body, i.e., what the body naturally is, brought some evangelical theologians and feminist theories together in the mid-20th century. So there's a lot to chew on there. Can you explain that and what those philosophies mean in practice, and why this connection, now that we bring it back to TERFs, was forged with evangelicals?
Yeah, absolutely. So this will sort of circle back to the issue of the worth of the worthwhileness, I guess, of this as an electoral strategy. So in particularly the 20th century, mid-20th century, a lot of trans autobiographies, which for many people was sort of where they got their information about trans people, a lot of trans autobiographies use this framing of "I was born in the wrong body." And this is, a lot of trans people still use this phraseology. I still use it sometimes, although I started to realize that people just misinterpret it all the time. But a lot of anti-trans thinkers, or people who became anti-trans, really misinterpreted this, like severely misinterpreted this. They started to think that what trans people were saying was literally that my body and my soul are separate entities. And in Christian theology, particularly at this time in the mid-20th century, there was this big pushback against what's called Gnosticism. To sort of give a brief summary, Gnosticism is this ancient collection of Christian mysticisms that were prevalent in the sort of 1st to 3rd century. And what they believed, contrary to what's now considered the Orthodox Christian belief, what they believed is that precisely that the body and soul were separate. That the real God created the soul, and the soul is sexless, and then this lesser God, the demiurge, created the body, which is sexed, and stuffed souls into it. And that's what they think Adam and Eve is all about. So Gnosticism has a really bad reputation in Christianity. And one of the things that a lot of Christian ethicists do is, when they don't like something, but they can't quite pin down what they don't like about it, they just accuse it of being Gnostic, because it works. Gnosticism has a toxic reputation. So I think this speaks to why the temperature is so high right now in terms of evangelical rhetoric on this subject, because a lot of this stuff isn't really designed to convince other people. It's designed to keep evangelical believers in line, because no one cares about Gnosticism. The only people who care about this are people who already know a little bit about Christian theology. And the way this relates to the feminist sort of angle, the so-called TERFs, is that TERFs essentially had the same philosophical objection to trans identities. They still do. In 1979, Janice Raymond wrote this book, The Transsexual Empire. It's infamous, it's toxic, horrible, full of invective and just it's like the 1979 equivalent of a transphobic soyjack, if that even makes sense.
Right.
So but she made the same point. She argued that trans identity is similar to Gnosticism, and she did this before any evangelical theologian had done that. So that this is the same fundamental philosophical objection. And nowadays there's a bit more of a divergence, at least with language, because feminists don't talk about Gnosticism because no one cares about Gnosticism. Instead, they say that transidentity is the worst aspect of postmodernism. But the objection is still the same, that transidentity is like propagating this schism between body and soul.
Is that a fundamental anxiety about like the spiritual realm being outside of the material? Or like outside of the body that we can physically kind of touch or perceive? Is that the anxiety there?
Sort of. So on the Christian side, the anxiety primarily is that this is an issue of soteriology, whether you're saved or not. So if you don't believe in the argument, and it falls down under scrutiny, but the argument is that if you don't believe in the Christian, Orthodox Christian idea of the body and soul, well, then you don't believe in Christianity and you can't be saved because you're fundamentally misunderstanding what Jesus was about. On the feminist side, it's more about, after the Second World War, in books like Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, there was really this pushback against the idea that womanhood is found in the body. Her famous phrase, de Beauvoir's famous phrase was, woman is not created such that society makes this being. So ideas of the social constructedness of gender were really starting to come into the cultural zeitgeist. And in the 70s, there was a bit of a pushback, 70s and 80s, there was a pushback against this. What was called, they called it somatophobia, fear of the body. There was a push to really reinsert the body into the conversation about how human identities are formed. And Raymond tried to position her arguments, and here in the UK, Germaine Greer tried to position her arguments as part of that pushback against somatophobic ideas about the body. So on the feminist side, it's anxiety about losing that connectedness with the body, that epistemological connectedness.
Right.
On the Christian side, it's about soteriology more than anything.
So, a lot of it to me feels like a fundamental, also like, and the theology that you describe and the philosophy fits into that, but this kind of opposition to modernity, and also the disrupting the natural order of one's body. How does that fit into the philosophy you describe?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It does connect very much with sort of natural, nature-based moral arguments, and that connects with then the issue of reproductive rights, because the idea is that the abortion is only made possible through the invasive presence of medical technology, disrupting nature, and transidentity sort of brings up similar things, at least where surgery is concerned, or hormonal changes. So yeah, definitely, it's about not just modernity but also post-modernity. The feeling that we are losing our ability to know things for certain. The argument against that has to be quite complicated because, well, yeah, we are losing that, but we're gaining a lot of other things as well. We're gaining the ability to understand human diversity more fully. We're gaining the ability to use Christian language, more fully appreciate the beauty of God's creation. So yeah, it is very much about fears in this sort of transitional phase that we're in between modernity and post-modernity.
And those fears seem to, from the TERF side, supersede anything that they previously opposed when it, at least like, just whatever, J.K. Rowling, we'll just take her as an example, who tried to, espouse certain liberal ideas. I mean, Dumbledore's gay, but I didn't put that in the book. I just decided later. But like that kind of stuff. Although when you look at oddly, I was talking to Matt about this. When you look at the way that those books end, the entire order is completely maintained, and there's nothing really subversive in any way about it. Why was Hermione mocked for trying to free slaves? There's a lot of questions about the philosophy, her political ideology before this, I would say. But, you know, at least on the surface, these kinds of folks, they call themselves feminists. They believe in, I guess, empowering biological women. And before trans people, I guess, came into their eye line, they, in theory, would have been in opposition to the Evangelicals, other movement that is most hateful towards trans people. In your analysis of this, like, how do they rationalize that? Is it just that their hatred of trans people is so overwhelming that it supersedes everything, and they don't contend with those other questions?
So largely it's a sort of slippery slope argument. The argument is that there's not that many trans people. We're not a particularly good enemy because we're not that threatening.
Right.
But the argument is that we are this sort of spear tip to this broader attack on reality, on the idea of objective truth, on the idea that any truth at all can be found in the physical universe. So it's connected with bigger anxieties. And I think one of the really important points that we need to draw out here is that often this alliance, this unlikely alliance between trans exclusionary radical feminists and conservative evangelicals, it gets described along the terms as essentially a marriage of convenience or a marriage of cynicism. That's often the case, but a lot of the time it really is to do with genuine, deeply held beliefs. And
essentialism?
Of essentialism, of this holistic idea about body and soul, which they think we're attacking when we aren't really. We need to be developing better rhetorical strategies right now, because at the moment our strategy seems to be to just sort of shame the feminist angle, the feminist aspect of this alliance, for taking money from the wrong people. But it's A, it's not effective, and B, it's often not accurate, because TERF groups have a lot of money as well.
Right. Well, what would be the major takeaway that you would want our audience to come away with about this alliance, and the best way to combat some of these talking points by getting to the core?
Yeah, so unfortunately, a lot of this does come down, certainly on the evangelical side, a lot of this comes down to us getting our crap in order. And there's not a huge amount that people can do to accelerate that outside. But for those people who either are in evangelicalism or know someone who's in evangelicalism, a big part of this is, don't let them have this conversation without our voice being in there. A lot of the spaces where this stuff gets propagated, whether it's news networks, whether it's churches, whether it's conferences, it's a closed feedback loop. There's no alternative perspective there. And so although it's really uncomfortable to be in that space, we need to be there as much as we possibly can, as long as we feel safe. And then also, I would say, not everyone involved in this alliance is cynical. Not everyone's a grifter. Not everyone is astroturfed. It's really sort of comforting sometimes to believe that that's the case, but it isn't always. And if we take that as our starting point, a lot of our communication is going to just come across as really condescending, sort of counter to their own experience. So that's the challenge really for us over the next few years. We need to ride out this current hysteria. It will go away, or it will the temperature will go down a little bit. And that's when the work really begins of developing better rhetorical strategies.
Well, Rebecca Jane Morgan, the book is Gender Heretics, Evangelicals, Feminists, and the Alliance Against Transliberation. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been really nice talking to you.
Yes, and we will put a link to your book in the description wherever people are watching or listening to this. Thanks so much.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking a bit more about Kissinger with Jonah Walters, because Jacobin has a great anti-obituary out, The Good Die Young. Be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Jonah Walters, postdoctoral scholar in the Biocritical Studies Lab at UCLA's Institute for Society and Genetics. He's written for Jacobin, including parts of the recently released book-length anti-obituary for Henry Kissinger, The Good Die Young, which everybody should pick up. Jonah, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, I felt when Kissinger died, kind of just a sense of ambivalence to a degree, because the fact that I know people were celebrating and it's fun and the memes are fun about it, but I'm still mostly just furious that he got to live this long, and the millions of deaths that he was responsible for, those folks, I mean, they had no chance. And I guess, what was your initial reaction? This book had been in the works for a while in anticipation of this guy eventually croaking. But, what was your initial reaction to his death?
Yeah, well, you're right. It had been in the works for quite a while. We started working on the book in 2015, I guess, sort of in the final days of the Obama administration. And then continued poking and prodding at it throughout the Trump years and into the Biden administration. So I think I was starting to feel impatient, as you say. My initial reaction when I heard the news, frankly, was relief that we finally got to release the book. I was really excited for the book to reach readers sort of in this moment. Our contributors, we seized upon the idea of releasing the book on the day of Kissinger's death relatively early in the process. And so our contributors did a really fantastic job creating essays that were that didn't depend upon the immediate political context of the book's release to resonate with readers. So I was really excited for readers to encounter these arguments and these stories now.
And I mean, it's important, I think, because of the revisionist history about his legacy. Obviously, the fact that he is still revered by people like Hillary Clinton and many in the national security establishment. Many see their work on behalf of our government as a continuation of his project of global, U.S. hegemony and domination. And, it's incredible to see that, given the fact that, you read about his relationship with Nixon, who many of these people, liberals or whatever, would widely regard as a president that should not be revered in any way. And yet these two guys were working hand in hand to, of course, Nixon and Kissinger extended the war in Vietnam and expanded it, but also the illegal bombings of Laos and Cambodia during that time, done in secret, seemingly just based on like a bloodthirsty ideological drive to exert American might through body count.
Yeah, Kissinger was certainly really skilled at navigating the bipartisan political and social landscape in Washington. In fact, early in the book, in the preface I wrote with my co-editors, we have some fun describing Kissinger's 90th birthday party, which was this big black tie affair that took place in New York City and that famously featured speakers from both the Republican and the Democratic Party. So this meant that you had sort of an unlikely cast of characters rubbing shoulders at this big event in New York City. You had John McCain giving this just really grandiose toast about Kissinger. And then later, according to party reporters, you had Hillary Clinton arriving through a back entrance with her arms open, asking who's ready for round two. And I think that scene really encapsulates the role that Kissinger was able to occupy, not only amongst, the social circles of the political elite, but also in American culture writ large. He was seen as this uniquely capable, grandfatherly figure. At the end of his career, early in his career, he was seen as sort of a sex symbol, but he was seen as this uniquely capable figure who could shepherd American power and was willing to make decisions that, as you say, stacked up bodies on behalf of American interests.
So, and what would you be your assessment of his ideology? I mean, Nixon obviously committed anti-communist, but like Kissinger spanned multiple administrations, Secretary of State twice, under Ford as well, and then also just like an informal advisor, and somebody who we can talk about his later years was also instrumental in foreign policy lobbying and influencing in that way, which is a scourge in our country as well. But what would you say his ideology was outside of like a religious belief in American empire?
That's a great question. And it's one that we spent a lot of time thinking about and discussing as we were planning this book. The book is introduced by the historian Greg Grandin, who wrote his own book-length treatment of Kissinger back in 2016 called Kissinger's Shadow. And his introduction to our book really attempts to answer that question and to think about what ideologically is motivating Kissinger and what kind of intellectual currents is he drawing from. In addition to being a statesman, he was also a prolific author and quite a confident self-mythologizer too, which made getting to the bottom of what he really thought about things sometimes kind of challenging. It's definitely true that the story he told about himself his entire life was that he was a boy who was born in Germany in the 1920s. He ended up fleeing Nazi repression with his family, coming to America. And then he returns to America at the age of 20, returns to Germany, at the age of 20 as an American intelligence officer. He's drafted into the army, and then he participates in denazification efforts in a city in Germany where he's stationed for several years. And then he comes back to the U.S. And sets about refashioning himself now as a foreign policy and international diplomatic scholar. Who then from, a perch at Harvard University manages to curry favor with Nixon, to enter the Nixon administration, and then to hang around the halls of power in Washington for decades after that.
Yeah. Before he went to Harvard, he went to Lafayette College, my alma mater, but we don't really like to talk about that. But I mean, yeah, it's fascinating too, because obviously within the context of the crimes of genocide in Gaza that we're seeing right now, it's instructive that somebody who experienced, what was a Jewish man born in Germany and then helped liberate a concentration camp and was a part of the armed forces of fighting the Nazis. It's instructive about how witnessing and seeing atrocities doesn't necessarily mean you're going to take the right lessons from that and try in your life to limit atrocities in the future, because whatever lesson Kissinger took from that is that not that we need to bring peace to the world, but that, American, the American efforts abroad are of warfare are what need to be taken from this moment.
Yeah, and I think he learned a lesson, really, if we can call it that, about exercising power, and about, I think, really what he draws from over the course of his whole career isn't so much an ideology as a willingness to exert power, and an almost a sort of libidinal attachment to exerting power. He was famous for thinking of America as a country that created the world in its own image. The most important thing was American strength. And to project American strength was, in effect, how America created its identity in the world. I think it's also important to say, though, that one of the things that we were really trying to do with this book is to think about Kissinger both as a really powerful personality and as a really important political figure in American history, but also to get away from this trend of thinking of him as an exceptional person, as someone who was drunk on power, say, or unilaterally making a bunch of decisions that had awful consequences around the world, and instead start to think about him more consistently and systematically as an embodiment of official U.S. policy. I mean, there's a reason that, his 90th birthday party, for example, was attended by Condoleezza Rice and Hillary Clinton. There's a reason why it was only with his 100th birthday earlier this year that I even started to see the occasional ding to his reputation in the mainstream press. He embodied American objectives, and he was willing to make decisions that advanced American interests for the better part of a century.
It's the way that, there's this drive to look at Trump, for example, as someone separate from the Republican Party, as opposed to a complete creation of the politics of the Republican Party. In many ways, Kissinger is not, a rogue individual, but as you say, a creation of American empire in the post World War II world, and also the embodiment of capitalism and global capitalism too. Because as I asked you earlier, what was his ideology? It's kind of irrelevant because in practice he was an instrumental figure in violent anti-communist military operations by the United States that spanned multiple continents. I mean, I mentioned earlier, obviously the secret bombing of Cambodia that killed hundreds of thousands and then led to a genocide there. But he was a huge part of toppling governments in Latin America on behalf of right-wing dictators.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is another argument that we try to make in the book. In the preface I wrote with Bhaskar Sankara and Renee Rojas, the other editors on the project. Kissinger doesn't just personify American power. He personifies American power at a really key moment in history where that power wasn't guaranteed. And in fact, at times seemed really close to collapsing. So after the end of World War II, the United States takes on a new geopolitical role in the world. And this is to reestablish global capitalism, or to ensure favorable conditions for capitalist investment in as much of the world as possible. And coming out of the wreckage of the Second World War, this isn't an easy thing to accomplish, and it's not a straightforward thing to accomplish either. I think a lot of times people maybe get things confused when they think about the American state's role as being to advance the immediate sort of profit interests of American corporations overseas. There's certainly an element of that takes place. But the overriding thing that was going on over the course of Kissinger's career and at this really key moment in the 20th century was that the United States had to serve as the guarantor of global business writ large, and not just American businesses. So this meant reestablishing healthy capitalist economies in Europe. It meant refashioning Japan, for example, into a productive trading partner. And it also meant moving quickly to quell the waves of decolonization that were happening in what was then called the Third World at the end of World War II. Because if nothing else, the Second World War provided a definitive signal to anti-colonization movements around the world that Europe's dominance was vulnerable. And so almost right away, there's this wave of popular movements in some of the places that you just listed around the world that were really challenging the terms of global development under U.S. hegemony or under capitalist hegemony. And any effort by these smaller, subordinate post-colonial countries to move on their own or to create their own sphere of influence and power would have undercut American objectives. And so Kissinger understood, perhaps better than any other American statesman, that the role of the U.S. in those moments was to step in and, frankly, to club those challengers into submission.
How did his influence and policies set the table for the Cold War?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's another story that Kissinger loved to tell about himself was that he was part of a group of Cold Warriors who understood how to balance American power against the threat of Soviet power or Soviet global influence. He was famous for periodically going on TV or the radio and performing histrionics in defense of Western market civilization, which he saw as an ideal that the U.S. and everyone ought to be upholding. In truth, though, I think we can now confidently say that checking Soviet influence was never an overriding goal of American foreign policy, for the simple reason that the Soviet Union wasn't capable of exerting very much influence. After World War II, it resigned itself to a strategy of détente as, a strategy of preserving itself against American intervention. It demanded really only a ring of buffer states to protect itself from what it saw as hostile powers in Europe and elsewhere. And after that, it allowed the United States and its partners to really operate and maneuver unchecked by Soviet counterpower throughout the Third World. There's a quip actually in our preface about how for an entire generation of movements, not only in the Third World but in places like Cyprus, there's a whole generation of militants there who understand the Cold War as a serial Moscow sellout of liberation movements around the world. And so really what Kissinger fears, or what he's moving to prevent, isn't a Soviet bloc that's going to threaten American hegemony. It's the emergence of any non-aligned or independent bloc of third world nations that might threaten American business interests.
Lastly, before I let you go, Jonah, what is the body count for people that may not be aware that we can draw directly to Kissinger and his policies?
Historians say different things, but it's in the millions. Some historians say 3 million, others say 2.5. It's an enormous number of people who suffered and died because of decisions that Kissinger and his partners took.
Well, thanks so much, Jonah. The book, The Anti-Obituary, is called The Good Die Young from Jacobin. Bhaskar, friend of the show, also obviously contributed to the book. It's essential reading, and I'm looking forward to checking it out even further. Jonah Walters, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, folks, with that, we're going to wrap up the first hour of this program and head into the fun half where we'll have fun, ? I mean, we have some fun clips on the docket today, but more and more ranting.
The anger half isn't. Some people like anger. That's a big draw for some people, I guess. Yeah, it's hard to be. Maybe we'll have some fun. I don't know. I feel like geared toward anger.
You do?
Yeah.
No way. Maybe we'll force ourselves to have fun in some way. Do hard drugs or something like that.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah.
So I don't try to goad the population into throwing shoes at White House spokespeople.
Well, I didn't realize this. Speaking of that, Texas Leftist writes in, Happy George W. Shoe Throwing Day to the MR and all crew and all who celebrate. I guess today's the anniversary of the shoe throw.
Yeah, I forget the guy's name who threw the shoe, but he is active on social media, and I just think that's one of the beautiful things about social media is it collapses the distance between you and celebrities you idolized growing up.
Celebrities?
Muntadar al-Zaidi, an Iraqi journalist.
Yeah.
15 years ago.
Him and Tom Cruise, the two celebrities.
It's I occasionally get H. John Benjamin liking some of my tweets, and then also I get to interact with a guy who threw a shoe at George W. Bush. The world is there's actually some things are getting better, folks.
Yes.
Maybe we'll watch Steve Deese perv out over Nancy Mace. Maybe we can have fun with that.
Oh
gosh,
God.
That sounds very fun.
The guy that's...
You could take a shower, you just saying that.
Yeah, human bowling ball. So he's going to be sweating more than normal.
He's moist.
Deese as in decently normal guy.
The number is 646-257-3920. We will be taking your calls in the fun half. Just a reminder, this show relies on your support. JoinTheMajorityReport.com. Pays our bills, pays our checks. If you like us, it would be nice. Hopefully we can get more money at some point if you guys support the show a little bit. And if you can't, totally understandable. You can email us at Majority Reporters and we will help you out. But if you can, it would be very nice. Kindly support the show. And we have merch. Check it out, folks. New t-shirts. If you have someone in your life who loves the show, we've got Whoopsie t-shirts. And we've got the one that has the days of the week on it. You know, we got Fun Day Monday, News Day Tuesday, Hump Day, EmMajority Report, and Casual Friday. So check that out. And for ESPN today, I had a horrible week.
Israel-Palestine?
Yes. Bradley, though, is closing in on me, and this is exactly what happened last year. I'm freaking out a little bit about me losing this competition, so check us out today at 4 p.m.
Isn't that a bad feeling in competition when you have an advantage and then you can just feel it sort of dwindling
and the worst part
you can do about it?
Is it that what killed me is I bet against the Giants, and they won. So... mixed feelings about that. Anyway, Matt,
you're playing the game called capitalism.
Yeah, actually, I am. I'm starting to see what you're saying about gambling, Matt. So what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning. I wish I. For some reason, didn't immediately blank on what we did on Left Reckoning. I am Muhammad Smith. We talked about the IDW and Brett and Dave Rubin talking about how actually there's a lot of good ideas in religion that maybe we shouldn't have skimmed over so fast. And also Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who Christopher Hitchens went to the press to call not a fundamentalist, has recently come out as a Christian because of the culture war globally. Not because anything to do with Jesus. I don't think she even mentioned Jesus in her... It's very funny to say, like, I'm a Christian now, and then to not mention Jesus at all, just be like, because Muslims are scary.
Yeah, right.
But check that out. And we'll have, check that out. We also went in deep into Rogan, slightly a different take we had on it yesterday on this program, but fundamentally the same thing is Joe Rogan talking to a fascist about who wants to bring back like Operation Condor and the Jakarta method, and Joe Rogan saying like, yeah, communism's pretty fucked up because you got to enforce it with authoritarianism. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get access to that.
All right, and we have Matt, and there we go, through the magic of
just wanted to say, little known fact based on what Matt was saying. Little known fact: Jesus is actually a very small part of Christianity, not at all relevant, not at all that important.
Oh well,
what's the important part? Like smiting Amalek? I guess that's not really Christianity. That's more
Santa Claus.
Santa. Oh, right, of course, and consumerism,
and
right.
white Santa Claus.
Oh,
yeah. White Santa, white Santa, white Jesus,
all of it,
Asian
being
God.
Honestly, though, if
Latinx
Santa
Holy Spirit.
If Santa really was the main character in Christianity, I think I could get on board that. Probably the jolliest of all the religious figures.
Exactly.
I mean, once you start questioning why Santa and Satan are anagrams, then you start really getting into true Christian dogma.
Anyway, what's up, you guys? What's happening on Scam Economy and Doomed, Binder?
Yeah, sure. So on Doom this week, I had on Ravana, and we basically looked at the week in news, everything going on in Gaza and Democrats giving George Santos money for cameos. Very, very smart guys over there. A wide variety of topics. So yeah, check that out at youtube.com/MattBinder. And
all right.
I think it's very funny to let George Santos anywhere near your credit card information.
Oh, I do. I understand. I mean, hopefully Cameo provides some sort of buffer, right?
Right.
I would have thought that like campaign donation sites provided some kind of buffer too, but my man finds a way.
Good point. What's happening over on the discourse, Brandon?
I will have an episode for you out tomorrow, more on Israel Palestine, and as that is the happenings of the week, and also talking more about the upcoming Republican and Democratic Party election. I mean, we normally call it presidential election, but I said it differently this time.
We understood. All right. The number is 646.
Cameo actually stands for the number of surprise appearances George Santos makes on your credit card bill. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Right. A cameo in your Amex theft alert. All right. 646-257-3920. See you there.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey! Shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
I'm back.
We are back. Sorry to interrupt everybody's conversation about house
Brandon
hunters.
and I really need to start a House Hunters podcast.
We would have infinite content.
I've been hearing about Hollywood Facelift as another show that's been, or no, not Houselift, Hollywood Houselift, sorry. There's another real estate show that people should check out, but I don't.
Selling Sunset is hilarious. I don't know if anybody's seen that on Netflix, because that is the show. It's like y'all are making how much money on commissions, and you are this unprofessional.
Oh
like,
yeah.
Do you do any work, or do you just like look like Lady Gaga, like background to dance?
You could also an alternative title for Selling Sunset could be Hollywood Facelift.
So I want to shout out Help I Wrecked My House, which is a home renovation show, not a home selling show, and it is a chilling expose on home self-renovations in this country, especially in California, where the walls appear to be paper thin.
I do like those HGTV shows though, where like they are, buying a house and you see the price, and it's because it's like in the, it's just so foreign when you look at real estate here on the East Coast or in the New York City area. you're getting a 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom house for $850K, and it's like, this house is $200,000 and it's 5 bedrooms in Arkansas. I'm like, Jesus Christ. Anyway,
HGTV is shop. Yeah, it's shopaganda though. Like none of that stuff is real. Like
I know.
I mean, which goes without saying, but in the ways that it's fake, it's still revealing.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it is some of the more insidious, probably like capitalist mind control content that I watch, because like half of it is like, oh, you don't think you can afford this 3-bedroom in Costa Rica, but the bank is willing to extend it loan. As long as you rent it out, you'll be fine.
Right.
And so become a landlord.
That's called house hacking now. That's the new thing on House Hunters. It's not being a landlord, it's house hacking. But I do like this is totally on track, but I do like how sometimes they let reality slip in accidentally on the shows. Like there will be like a moment where things get like too real. So like on Tiny House Hunters, you'll occasionally get like one of those families who's moving into a tiny house, which hilarious. I think that trend is over now.